All right, everybody, good morning. I know that we've got a quick turnaround here. I know that we're playing a game tomorrow night, but we are going to keep to the typical schedule for now. We're going to talk about some of these college football prospects here. And then tomorrow morning, I'll do my pregame for the Niners, and we'll go from there. So, we had another week of college football here, not too many of them left, and we're really starting to get a good idea of who the prospects to watch truly are. Honestly, at this point, there's only so much players can do to really change where they are in the pecking order. But I want to highlight some guys at various positions who stood out to me in a positive way this week. We're going to start with quarterbacks. There was some fun quarterback play this week, including a couple guys I have not discussed in this space at all yet. So let's get started here. We've got Jaden Daniels. He's kind of the star of the show almost every week now. 8 touchdowns and over 500 yards of offense. 25 of 30 for 413 yards. Ran for almost 100. 94 PFF grade. I can't deny what Jaden Daniels is doing anymore. He is screaming up those big boards. He may end up being a round 2 pick. I still have some reservations, but I'll tell you, those reservations are flying out the door quickly because he's just good. Like, he's not, even the size thing is not really that big of a deal at this point, I feel like, because he's got an NFL arm. So Jaden Daniels cruising on up. Bo Nix had a very similar game, 6 touchdowns, all in the first half, 400 yards, great completion percentage. Didn't do very much with his legs because he didn't have to. 90.5 PFF grade. So Bo Nix, I mean, you guys know I'm very hesitant to give Bo Nix credit because I don't know if his game is going to work in the NFL, but we're seeing more and more positive signs that it might work with each passing week because every game it seems like he shows up. Cam Ward for WSU. WSU finally won a game, so good for them. 18 of 30 for 288 yards, 2 touchdowns. He ran for 2 touchdowns as well. 75 PFF grade. Now he's playing Colorado, so it barely counts. But he finally had a good game and a game that his team won in, which hadn't happened in nearly 2 months. So good for Cam Ward. He's off the schneid. These last two guys are new names, guys that we haven't discussed yet, but I do want to bring attention to them at least once before the season's over so they don't come out of nowhere when we start discussing them in the offseason. The first guy, Michael Pratt of Tulane. He's a small school guy. He's kind of been the token small school guy getting a lot of good attention during this draft season, and he had a nice game on Saturday. 21 of 28, 252 yards, 3 touchdowns, 91.8 PFF grade, really solid, really good. So Michael Pratt is going to be your small school quarterback du jour. He's kind of supplanted Grayson McCall as the small school guy. So keep an eye on him going forward. Last guy is Carson Beck, who I have not really talked about here. And I have real big reservations about Carson Beck in the NFL. I think that without Georgia's supreme talent that surrounds him, he's not going to be able to cut it. But if you want to draft somebody in the really late rounds, like kind of like Stetson Bennett was last year, and just see if against all odds they can become the guy in the NFL, Carson Beck is probably one of the better options. He had a good game for Georgia, almost 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, ran for 5 yards, 84.8 PFF grade. At least worth a mention at some point. All right, so now we motor on to tight ends, and I'll tell you, it was not a great week for tight ends. Bowers had a nice game, 7 catches and a touchdown, 60 yards. Georgia had a good game on offense in general. 66.4 PFF grade, though. He didn't do a great job blocking, I think is what it was. Cade Stover, 4 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown. I mean, that's not exactly a performance that you should get excited about, but this week it was one of the best I could find. And Ohio State ran the ball extremely well on, I think it was Minnesota, 6.1 yards a carry, 65.3 PFF grade for Stover, so good. Jaheim Bell, 2 catches, but 59 yards, and he lost his quarterback early in that game. Florida State ran all over, I can't remember what team they were playing, some not very good team. 6.7 yards a carry, which obviously doesn't have a ton to do with Bell, but he's a tight end. He did allow 1 pressure in pass protection, but 68.6 PFF grade works. That'll play, no problem. Ben Sinote of KSU is back. He had 4 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. KSU ran the ball effectively, 166 rushing yards, and his PFF grade was 70.6. He continues to be one of my favorite later round guys. Maybe he's creeped up a little bit towards like the fifth, maybe even fourth round. I don't know. And a final guy, and this was me really trying to dig deep to find something. Trey Knox of South Carolina, 4 catches, 35 yards. PFF grade was subpar though, 59.7. Limited player, but he's becoming kind of interesting in this class because it's not been a great tight end class. A lot of guys have gotten hurt, a lot of guys have underperformed, and you end up digging around for guys like Trey Knox to save you a little bit when you're entering a draft class where you know you're going to need to draft at least one impact tight end. So those would be my tight ends for this week. Interior offensive line had a little bit more luck here. It was a pretty good week for these guys. Cooper Bebe leads the way for KSU. They ran the ball pretty well. Bebe allowed 1 pressure as a left guard. He did play every snap of this game at left guard, by the way, because I want to point that out because in some games he plays some tackle, in some games he goes to the right side, but he is primarily a left guard, and that is where KSU has him most of the time now. 81.3 PFF grade, really good stuff. Continues to be one of my favorite guys personally in this class. Zach Zinter's next up, Michigan, 150 rushing yards. Not super efficient by Michigan's offense, but he didn't allow anything in pass protection. 75.5 PFF grade, full-time right guard, by the way, so he's becoming one of the top right guard prospects. Jackson Powers Johnson of Oregon. Oregon was fairly effective running the ball. Powers didn't allow anything in pass protection. 70.5 PFF grade. He's starting to really get my attention as one of the top centers in this class, and it's not a very good center class, so he needs to be given some priority looks if you're looking for a center. Christian Haynes of UConn. Haven't talked about this guy that much, but he's another small school guy who's getting a lot of attention now. UConn ran for over 200 yards. He didn't allow anything in pass protection. He's a right guard, so it's a little easier for him to not give up anything in pass protection, but he's a big reason why UConn runs the ball so well. 69.9 PFF grade, really good. And final guy, this is a guy I also haven't talked about very much this year, is Wilmer of Arkansas. Over 300 yards rushing for the Razorbacks, one of their best games of the year. Limmer did allow 1 QB pressure on Jefferson, but he played an all-around really good game, also a center, 75.3 PFF grade. He's starting to assert himself as another one of the top centers in this class, so definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now we switch on over to the defense here. Defensive line, this was a little bit tough. I didn't find a lot of guys with big statistical performances, but I did find some guys who did their job extremely well from snap to snap. And sometimes on the defensive line, that's more important. So let's start with a common favorite, T'Vondre Sweat of Texas. T'Vondre Sweat of Texas continues to be awesome. Texas allowed 9 rushing yards this week, 0.4 yards per carry, so dominant on the ground. Sweat himself only had 1 tackle and 1 pass deflection at the line, but he did have 3 QB pressures. And this is a 360-pound man, by the way, so there's some very impressive stuff going on here beneath the surface. And his 89.8 PFF grade is well earned because of how good dominant Texas is against the run. So even on a day when he doesn't put up big numbers, Sweat performs big. Rook Orohoro finally makes an appearance here. We haven't really talked about him at all this year, but he had a good game for Clemson. 4 tackles, 1.5 for loss, 1 sack, 5 QB pressures. So really impressive getting to the quarterback here. 74.4 PFF grade. A new name, Landon Jackson of Arkansas. 4 tackles, 1.5 for loss, 1 sack, 3 pressures. Arkansas only allowed 76 rushing yards, 3.3 yards a carry. 70.8 PFF grade. Really solid game for him down in the trenches. He's kind of a late riser here, but I'm liking what I'm seeing. Dante Corleone shows up, first time in a little while here, the Cincinnati Bearcat product. Not huge numbers, 2 tackles and 2 QB pressures for the big guy, however, will get it done. 73 PFF rating. And we got to talk a little bit about T'Vondre Sweat's partner down in the trenches, Byron Murphy. He easily gets overlooked because of how good Sweat is, but Byron Murphy II is a good player as well. 2 tackles 1.5 for loss, both sacks. So he had a sack and a half, 6 QB pressure. So he was all over the quarterback. And he was part of that dominant run defense for Texas. And his PFF grade was excellent, 89.1. So got to give him some love as well. He may end up getting drafted too. Worth a look. All right, now we're moving on to linebacker here. Again, there was a little bit of difficulty finding good guys in this category, but I did dig up some guys who we should be pretty familiar with by now, who did have at least pretty good games. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. continues to push in a positive direction. He started out real slow, but he's really rounding into form here for the Tigers. He had 11 tackles, 1.5 for loss, 1 sack, 3 QB pressures, 1 pass breakup. The fact that he's playing better in coverage is big because that was a supposed flaw in his game going into the season and earlier this year. Allowed 19 yards in coverage, 61.8 PFF grade. So Trotter's rounding into shape here. Junior Colson, another one of the top linebackers here. Michigan Wolverine, 8 tackles, 2 pressures. He did allow 40 yards in coverage, which isn't great. But Michigan as a whole only allowed 15 rushing yards, 0.5 yards per carry, and only 262 total yards allowed. So the Michigan defense as a whole was dominant, and he's a big part of that. 72.4 PFF grade. Danny Stutzman's back in our good graces here. 10 tackles, 2 for a loss for Oklahoma. A sack, 2 QB pressures, only allowed 12 yards in coverage. So he continues to be all over the place doing the thing. 65.8 PFF grade. I want to give Barrett Carter some ups here as well. He didn't have a monster game the way Trotter did, but he continues to solidly grind next to Trotter. 4 tackles, 1 QB pressure, 2 pass breakups, 0 yards allowed in coverage, which is really nice. 71.8 PFF grade, so he's doing his thing. Final guy will be Cedric Gray from UNC. He's always kind of out there putting up numbers, but he was really good this week, I think. 8 tackles, 1 pressure, 1 pass breakup, only allowed 9 yards in coverage. All over the place for a very flawed UNC defense that really struggles outside of Cedric Gray. 74.7 PFF grade. Nice and solid, totally workable. Finally, let's go through safety here. Andrew Makuba makes our list again. He's somebody who I'm starting to really kind of get turned on to. He doesn't put up the big numbers that you sometimes want, but it seems like he's consistently solid. He had 4 tackles, 1 QB pressure in this game, 2 pass breakups, didn't allow anything in coverage, no catches, no yards, 67.2 PFF grade. Nice work from Makuba. Again, he's not putting up dominant numbers, but there's a really nice player here for sure. Bu Braid of Maryland in Maryland's valiant attempt to upset Michigan played well. 11 tackles, 1 for a loss, a pass breakup, only allowed 20 yards in coverage. Maryland as a whole only allowed 291 total yards, which is really impressive. But 62.7 PFF grade is just okay. But Braid continues to impress me every time I see him. Cameron Kinchins is an interesting one, the Miami safety. He put up nice numbers, 8 tackles, 2 QB pressures, and a pick. So he's a playmaker, but he also allowed 63 yards in coverage. He missed some tackles, so his PFF grade is below 47, which is really bad. So that's just kind of an example of taking the bad with the good, or the good with the bad, or however you want to slice that. Javon Bullard of Georgia makes the list as well. 6 tackles, 1 pass breakup, only allowed 15 yards in coverage. He's obviously surrounded by dominant talent in Georgia, but I like Bullard. He's really pushing up draft boards lately. 70.9 PFF grade. Tyler Nubbin of Minnesota only had the 1 tackle, which right away seems like, what's he doing here? He played an all-around really solid game and was a big part of the little bit that Minnesota was able to do effectively on defense. Only allowed 21 yards in coverage, 70 PFF grade against that dominant Ohio State team. So he makes the list despite not really putting up big numbers. Sometimes you can do that as a safety. Sometimes it's your job to not put up big numbers as a safety. I think we all know that. Earl Thomas would have games where he didn't put up much numbers, but he did his job great. And that's all I got for this week. So some really fun stuff happening at quarterback. I really like what's going on in the interior offensive line. But other than that, I'm ready for the combine to get here so we can start to see which of these guys really jump off the page in terms of the talent they bring. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys think I missed anything, how you guys are feeling about this draft crop. See you guys later. Go Hawks. And more college football stuff coming a little bit later on.